The wizard reached into his pocket and removed his small silver remote. Then so be it. He pushed a button and at once every little robot head turned toward them with electrical eyes blazing. The machines that could move charged at them, some dragging half-assembled bodies. Puck swatted a few away with his wooden sword, but one of the mechanical birds swooped down and snatched the journal out of Sabrina's hand. It immediately flew back to Oz and gave him its prize. Then Oz ran. The Falcon had to fight through the crowd of misfit robots that chased after him as he dashed out of the workroom and through the empty store. It was mostly dark, but there were a few security lights on, so it was easy to follow him. But he kept overturning racks of clothing and merchandise in the family's path. Puck stopped, spun around on his heels, and quickly transformed into a bull with huge horns. He bent his head down, stomped his front hooves a few times, blasted a breath out of his nostrils, and then charged forward, tossing the obstacles out of the way. The woman raced close behind. They watched Oz take the escalator up to the floor above. Puck transformed back to his normal state, then raced up the escalator 2 stairs at a time. Sabrina wasn't far behind. Daphne stayed back to help Granny Rhoda along. They chased Oz up 5 flights, with Puck still in the lead. They were racing through the sporting goods department when Sabrina saw Puck flail through the air and slam into a nearby wall. Then something came around the corner at her. Sabrina had seen it many times before as a young girl. She had associated it with sugar plum dreams. Now it made her think of nightmares. It was a 7-foot-tall nutcracker, painted to look like a red-coated soldier with a white beard. Its most horrible feature was a gaping mouth that smashed closed every few moments, as if it were gnashing its teeth. "Oh dear," Granny said, as she and Daphne came up behind Sabrina. Puck crawled to his feet, rushed behind the nutcracker, and delivered a well-placed kick to its behind. The robot turned and lunged at him. "They don't sell explosives in the store, do they?" Puck shouted as he dodged the creature's massive arm. "They sell everything else," Sabrina said, glancing at a store directory on the wall. "Wait a minute, sporting goods! We're on the sporting goods floor!" With Puck keeping the monster's attention, she and her family raced around, choosing weapons. Daphne found a tennis racket, which she swung wildly at the robot, but her racket turned into splinters when it caught in the nutcracker's deadly jaws. Granny found a couple of soccer balls, but when she raced back to use them on the robot, it easily deflected her blows. "What's that thing?" Puck said. He was pointing to an odd machine that said Pitchmaster on the side. The contraption had a pump that shot balls through a tube at super speeds. Sabrina guessed it was to teach batters how to hit fastballs. Fastballs! She flipped the machine on and pushed the button, and a baseball rocketed out of the tube and hit a nearby mannequin, knocking its head off its shoulders. "Oh, I've got to get me one of those things," Puck said. "Do you think we'll shoot balloons filled with donkey poo?" Sabrina ignored Puck's disgusting idea and shouted to her sister, "Help me turn this toward the nutcracker." When they had the machine lined up, Sabrina hit the button again, and a ball screamed out of the tube and hit the nutcracker in the chest. The force was so incredible it left a huge dent. The creature turned, a red light flashing in its mechanical eyes. It rushed at them so quickly, the only thing to do was push the button on the ball machine and hold it down. A ball crashed into the robot's face, knocking a metal panel off and revealing its wiring. Then another slammed into its right leg. Each ball knocked the robot back, but each time it recovered and kept coming at them. Sabrina quickly studied the Pitchmaster's controls. There was a button that read Lightning Fastball. She pushed it just as the nutcracker's hand reached out for her. A ball shot out of the machine's tube and hit the creature between the eyes. Smoke suddenly bellowed out of its head, and little sparks of fire popped around inside what had been the robot's brain. A second later, the creature fell over and moved no more. There was a loud clang, and Sabrina turned. Oz had been hiding nearby and knocked over a rack of bicycles in his effort to escape. He raced to the escalators, and the entire family took after him. As soon as the wizard reached the top of one escalator, He hurried to the next until he had quickly reached the top floor of the store. When the Grimms and Puck finally got there, there was no one in sight. "Oz, we know you're up there," Granny Rhoda called out. "Yeah, you can't hide from us or from the beating you're going to get when we find you," Puck said. "Shut up, you're not helping," Sabrina said. "Don't tell me to shut up, I'm a king," Puck said. "You're an idiot." Just then, an enormous glowing head materialized out of thin air. It seemed to be made of emerald green fire and had horrible black eyes. When its mouth opened, Oz's voice came bellowing out. "I have never had luck with children. I have to admit I've always underestimated them, and they have been my undoing." Puck snatched a giant candy cane decoration off a wall nearby and swung it at the head. "Ah, shut up!" The cane passed right through the head, breaking up the image only temporarily. "Look at Dorothy," the head continued. "That little girl was a moron, I tell you. I mean dumber than a box of rocks. She comes to me asking for a way back to Kansas. I mean, if you could have a wizard grant a wish, would you waste it on going to Kansas? And her friends, give me a heart, give me a brain, give me courage. What they needed was a clue. So I sent them to see the Wicked Witch of the West. Who would have thought they'd ever come back? They ruined everything for me. Well, I won't let it happen again. It's time the wizard got a wish of his own." Sabrina motioned for everyone to follow her. Oz had to be hiding somewhere nearby. "You're not going to get away with this," she muttered. "Oh, but I am," Oz cried as the head followed her. "After all, I'm the great and terrible wizard. I can do magic, child, and I've got a lot of tricks up my sleeve." They turned a corner and found a man standing in plain view. He was busy walking the buttons on his silver remote control, pounding them frantically and causing the little device to squeal and honk. When he finally noticed the family, he groaned. "Don't look behind the curtain," he said with an uncomfortable laugh. "Oz, give me the book," Sabrina said. "I can't, child," he said. The wizard shook his head as he pushed a button on his remote, then backed away from the group. Suddenly, there was an incredible rumbling beneath them. The building shifted as a fissure opened up, snaking across the entire floor. Puck and the Grimms were knocked to their knees. The floor was splitting in two to make way for something bigger, round and green. For something big, round, and green. It rose higher and higher and got bigger and bigger until it nearly filled the entire store. With nowhere else to go, it pushed to the ceiling, causing concrete and wood to crash down around everyone. "Is this another one of his robots?" Puck shouted as he clung to Sabrina. "No, it's something else," she said as a large woven basket rose up from below. It was attached to the giant green orb by ropes and had a silver furnace inside it. The wizard climbed into the basket and then it too lifted upward. Suddenly, Sabrina knew exactly what the thing was. "It's a hot air balloon." The basket rose through the hole in the ceiling and the balloon was aloft. "Give me the journal, Oz!" Sabrina cried. "Is that the wish you want the mighty Oz to grant?" he cried as he rose higher and higher. "Then you will have to do something for me first." "Stop playing games!" Granny Rhoda cried. "You know the story, people. You can have your heart's desire, but you have to do something for me. You have to kill the Wicked Witch of the West." Sabrina saw Oz push another button on his controller just as the balloon disappeared from sight. "I don't think he's my favorite anymore," Daphne said. "I'll get him," Puck cried, beginning to flap his wings. But suddenly there was more loud rumbling from below, and he spun around in midair. Sabrina felt it too. It seemed as if the entire building was being rocked back and forth. Then, all at once, the shaking stopped. What was that?" Sabrina said. Granny looked around nervously. "I don't know, and I don't like it." The old woman grabbed Daphne and Sabrina by the hands and hurried them over to the emergency exit. Puck flew after them. Together, the group raced down 9 flights of stairs. They finally reached the ground floor of the department store and found it a disaster. Racks of clothing and broken bottles of perfume were scattered over the floor, and hosiery was draped everywhere. Worst of all, an enormous canyon had opened up in the floor. "Find an exit, children," Granny said. But before they could take a step, a big black metallic cone began to rise out of the breach in the floor. It rose and rose, expanding as it came. "This can't be good," Puck said. Soon, the enormous cone was completely revealed, but beneath it came another object. This one was also made of metal, but it had a sickly green tint to it. It rose higher and higher, revealing a pair of eyes, one covered in a black patch. Then came a long, pointy, wart-covered nose, then a mouth with jagged steel fangs. Sabrina knew what was erupting from below. The cone was a hat, and the face was one she'd seen in a book. She grabbed her sister and her grandmother, shook them until they took their eyes off the growing horror, and together with Puck ran for the closest door. "What is that thing?" Puck shouted. "It's the Wicked Witch of the West," Sabrina shouted back. She pushed hard on the door, but it was locked tight. She had forgotten the store was closed. She pounded on the glass, hoping that it would shatter, but she wasn't strong enough. Thankfully, Puck understood the situation. He morphed his arm into that of a gorilla's and punched the door with all his might. Not only did the glass break, but the door flew off its hinges and the family raced out into the snow. Unfortunately, they were not alone. The streets were packed with people. Taxis, trucks, and cars were everywhere. It was then that Sabrina realized how much easier it was to handle these types of disasters in Ferryport Landing, where the downtown area was usually barren. But here in New York City, the city that never slept, every corner was as crowded as a parade. "Run!" Granny roared and yelled, and the family took off down the sidewalk. "Get off the street!" Sabrina shouted to the crowd. "There's a monster!" People ignored her and went about their business, but she still tried to get their attention. "There's a giant robot coming! Run for your lives!" The family dashed in and out of the crowd and quickly reached the corner of the street. The traffic was intense, so they couldn't just run out into it. They were forced to wait for the light, which gave Sabrina a chance to look back at the store. She did so just in time to see the entire front of the building collapse and a huge leg step through. That got the New Yorkers' attention. Cars drove into trucks. A taxi crashed into a newspaper stand. When the light changed, the family raced across the street, continuing to shout warnings to everyone they saw. Sabrina heard a huge pounding sound and looked back again. The robot was completely free of the store now. It stood nearly 6 stories tall. It scanned the streets and then fixed its horrible electronic gaze on Sabrina. It began to walk in her direction, kicking a taxi cab out of the way. The cab slammed into a light pole and then skidded into the intersection. A truck that had the misfortune of driving near the creature's shoe was knocked aside and sent into a nearby building. The family kept running, but now the pedestrians were getting smart. Suddenly, the wave they had been fighting against turned, and crowds of New Yorkers ran in with them. Many looked back as they ran, and a young woman knocked Daphne to the ground in her panic. Puck swooped up the little girl, but before she was trampled. "How are we going to stop this thing?" Puck shouted. "I think it's going to take more than a couple of fastballs." "Look," Daphne said, pointing above them. Sabrina saw Ozzy's hot air balloon sailing into the sky. It was strangely close to the Empire State Building. In fact, it was too close. The spire at the top had caught the balloon. "He can stop the witch!" Sabrina shouted. "Head for the Empire State Building!" The family raced on, but the enormous witch grew closer with each giant step. By the time they got to the skyscraper, the robot was right on top of them. They pushed through the revolving doors of the famous building and dashed into the bronze-covered lobby. A security guard got up from his desk and held up his hand. "We're closed, folks. Come back next week." "We've got to get to the top now," Sabrina said. "No can do." This seems to be the end of this video. I'll send more later. Goodbye.